And we are good to go.
All right, welcome to Sustainable Design Masterclass, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you again. I'm really happy to see a number of repeat folks. And we are a weekly webinar series. If you're just tuning in for the first time, we try to have on people who are doing real work on the ground related to building a sustainable human civilization. We tend to focus on agriculture, land use, water use, as well as a little bit on entrepreneurship and building enterprises and the human and the social and the political side of doing all this stuff. So welcome. We're really happy to have you here. This week we've got Erin Axelrod from Lift Economy, and Raleigh is going to introduce her.
All right, so I was really excited to have Erin on because I've met her at so many permaculture conferences in Northern California. She's everywhere. She is everywhere. She is like an omnipresent force in this Northern California space, and it was so cool. I eventually had to talk to her, and I was like, what are you doing? And I was fascinated to learn that she is a co-partner and helps run Lift Economy, which has helped over 160 regenerative agriculture-based businesses launch off the ground and get funding. Erin's work is hugely important because she's helped people from so many different spaces locally get started. These are farmers, folks like you and me, who desperately wanted to start a land-based business, and they just needed a boost. They needed some advice. We got hemp farmers, material farmers, fungi material makers. The list is endless. Erin is deeply knowledgeable about so many pathways to successful entrepreneurship, which is why I just thought Erin is the perfect person to have on here and present about some of the ways that you can get to where you want to go in a regenerative agriculture or land-based life that you can sustain yourself with and build a great business around. So I'm proud to have Erin on, and thank you so much for joining us, Erin. And as a quick reminder before we get started, turn off your Facebook, turn off your phone, because Erin's going to be dropping some epic, amazing knowledge bombs, which you'll want to be present for. So thank you, Erin, for joining us, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Raleigh. That's really, and I'm so honored to be here because my purpose, my drive in the world is to support the land-based entrepreneurs that are on the ground doing the work. My best friend is Ariel Greenwood. She grazes 150 head of cattle on 4,100 acres on a nature preserve in Sonoma County, and literally my best friends are farmers and people on the ground doing the work. So that's really core to what we do here at Lift Economy as well, and increasingly moving into researching ocean farming and how that can be a viable solution as well to our climate crises. So yeah, I loved the webinar last week with Mark Mooney around the mesquite farming. I've long time been a forager myself. I forage for my own seaweeds off the coast of California, yeah, I'm just really thrilled to be here. So I'll dive right in. There were a few people who asked some great questions, and I'd love to invite collaboration in this presentation and invite you to use the chat function to write in your questions as they come up for you, because really what we do here at Lift Economy is really largely very iterative, and we design our work in partnership with the entrepreneurs on the ground that are actually sensing and responding to the challenges and obstacles and problems that are coming up for them. And we have a background in business development and business consulting and raising capital, and so, but really it's the people on the ground that know what's happening and what's causing the biggest headaches, and those are the problems that I strive to help people solve. So yeah, I just wanted to briefly, let's see if I can click through here to the next slide. Yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention my background. After college, I entered into the workforce directly with an organization called Daily Acts, and had an incredible suite of mentors there, including Kevin Bayuk, who is now my business partner at Lift Economy, the co-founder of Lift Economy, Trathan Heckman, the executive director of Daily Acts, and Erik Olson. And Daily Acts, the reason I bring up Daily Acts, it's really the drive behind why I do what I do. Is I felt so fortunate to have landed right after college in a livelihood where every ounce of my energy, every moment of my time was spent in the effort of restoration and regeneration of not only landscapes. With Erik Olson, we transformed 25,000 square feet of lawn into a permaculture food forest at Petaluma City Hall. We've transformed tens of thousands of other lawns throughout Sonoma County into public, edible, food-producing, habitat-producing ecosystems. So not only the active restoration, but also the community restoration piece, and that to this day still really drives me. But one of the observations I found when I was there at Daily Acts is so many people were coming with serious challenges and questions around how to make a livelihood in permaculture. And I felt like I won the lottery of landing at Daily Acts and having not a outsized salary, but certainly a livable salary for a 22-year-old at that time. So I started really wondering, what is it about our economic system that is causing so many people to have to do permaculture on the side as a hobby? And I went deeply into
quick interruption. There's a big black bar on the audience sees on the right part of your screen. If you can just click minus, it's because the notifications are running. So if you can just minimize that and then open the presentation again, then you should be all right.
Can I just close it?
Yeah, then just open it again, because right now, when the notifications pop up, they kind of leave a big black box.
So let me just close my whole emails and stuff.
All good. Well, you can start it from the same presentation, and we should be good. Okay. So.
Okay. Thank you. Good quality control. That's great. So this is my team. Can you see it now? The slide?
Yep, we can. I can see
it. Yeah, we can see it, Erin.
Great. So this is my team, and what I wanted to underscore is we are a worker-owned impact consulting firm. So what that means is we're a California benefit corporation, but we run using collective decision-making and co-ownership. And so we have an explicitly defined vision with goals around the change we seek to affect in the world, but we all are independent agents, independent actors in fulfilling that vision. So for me, my specialty within our suite of all the services we provide is I work with land-based entrepreneurs. So my clients are farmers, ranchers, people creating elements of our material goods culture through things like fungi and wool and hemp. And those are the businesses that I seek to serve. So while we're going through, just in the spirit of crowdsourcing, I'm always curious to hear, what are some of your biggest challenges in your business right now? Where are you struggling within the economy to bring forth your regenerative principles to the market? And I'll share what I've learned over 4 years of doing this and some kind of pro tips and strategies to alleviate some of the major struggles. Like one of my it keeps me awake at night is what we call at Lyft the price parity paradox. You probably all know this intimately because many of you are in the business of producing food, but what we consider the price parity paradox is the fact that every time we step out of the exploitative economy, the extractive economy, and try and do business in a better way and try to pay people well and and support our planetary resources, support our natural capital, our natural ecosystems, we encounter this conundrum that often we have to price our products higher because it costs more to produce when we're actually caring for people and planet. And so what are some of the strategies for addressing this price parity paradox, we call it? But I'm really curious to hear from yours. And maybe, Raleigh, you can help by, if people ask questions, feel free to kind of, or make comments around some of the biggest challenges. Feel free to interrupt me and call them out, because I want to make this as simple as possible for people.
So yeah, if anyone wants to ask those questions, just type in the chat box, and we can take a short break to answer a few of them. Because instead of just waiting all to the end, there'll be a few breaks through the presentation to ask questions. So here's the first one. This is just from Tim Delory. He says, biggest challenge, suburbia energy wasting challenge, high cost around it, and solar not being a solution. He says, can you discuss crowdfunding?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So I'll get there in literally 2 slides. Before I go to crowdfunding, I just want to get us all on the same page, and I think we already are, but just to reiterate, because having a collective shared vision is so critical and so important. And this next economy that we're going towards is providing essential needed goods and services to people, right? Food, water, shelter, fiber, clothing are primary form of shelter. And it's regenerative, because clearly the outcomes of the current economy that we're facing are stark. 1 billion people are going to be malnourished on the planet today, tomorrow. 800 million people without a lack of access to water and sanitation. We know all these ecosystems in major decline, climate change. And so we have some healing, we have some repair to do. So I focus on working with enterprises that are actively leveraging the power of the economy to catalyze that regeneration on the planet. And we envision, too, that this is going to be very much like permaculture. Our co-founders both have a background in permaculture. So Kevin Bayou started the Urban Permaculture Institute. And we envision that this economy is built from the grassroots, from growing and supporting and growing the enterprises that are currently regenerating ecosystems in their local community, growing them bigger, and then replicating them in every bioregion on the planet. Basic needs, I already mentioned that. So this is just kind of a good way to think about it. Right now we're at the top of this chart. We have a economy where large separation between what we have are these masses of the dependent consumer, typically in the affluent world, and then the global producer, which is inherently extractive. The producer sending goods and services away globally, extracted from their communities to fuel the consumption patterns of the dependent consumer. So, but there are gems within this economy of this second phase, which is actually more discerning consumers and local producers that are working in partnership to address things like the price parity, to crowdfund. So this is a great example of crowdfunding, because discerning consumers can actually invest by way of investment crowdfunding laws that are pretty new in the U.S. They can invest their resources, not being accredited investors. Actually, any average Joe can invest their resources into supporting the local producers. And then I just want to mention this self-sufficient producer, because many of you are already embodying aspects of self-sufficiency. And I seek to embody aspects of self-sufficiency as well, to reduce my need for income, for financial income. Things like seaweed harvesting, mushroom foraging, food gleaning, as well as growing a portion of my own food. And so these are just sort of like a nice way to think about how the shifts that need to happen. And, honestly, we need to work at each of these different levels right now in our current economy and move each of these levels of interaction between consumer and producer, move it forward into regeneration. Okay, crowdfunding is coming up in a few more slides. So how do we do this? We have somewhat of a, like permaculture principles, we have a set of principles that we use when we're designing businesses with our entrepreneurs. And it really starts with these 4 pieces: vision, culture, strategy, and operations. And I'm going to go through each of these different pieces of your enterprise and why each is important. So vision. This is a big one, and so many entrepreneurs out there have big, big visions that they wish to seek and manifest in the world. And one of the things that I like to always start with around vision is defining it by specific and time-bound. One of the key components of a vision is having goals that are specific, measurable, and time-bound. And Neil, I often think about your work actually when I'm imagining the importance of having measurable and time-bound goals. Not because you're always going to get them right. In fact, half the time, the goals that you set out, you're going to diverge away from those. It's not going to happen exactly as you had planned. But the purpose of creating a vision is twofold. One, once your vision is no longer implicit, and by implicit I mean, oh yeah, you're around drinking beers with your buddies, and you're like, yeah, we all believe in an economy that works for all life. Implicit often actually leads to a lot of conflict and disagreement, because it's actually seldom the case that everyone defines that in the same way. And so what I mean by an explicitly defined vision with specific and time-bound goals is that you actually allow more people to join with you to fulfilling that vision by making it explicit, by clearly defining the principles and parameters by which you're seeking to achieve that vision. We'll go into that a little bit more when we talk about culture. And the second reason why you would have an explicitly defined vision is in order such that you can build operational systems to measure your success and to track back against your success. So by that, Neil, a perfect example of, I remember at Permaculture Voices conference, hearing you describe a vision of phase 1, we're going to reforest X amount of acres of the west coast of Saudi Arabia. Phase 2, I think it went up to, was it 10 million in phase 2? And then maybe 100.
But yeah, you're along the right kind of lines. Inevitably, it's 30 million acres of desert.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And you also may have a time frame that you wish to see that restoration happen. Maybe it's 10 years. And you inevitably are probably going to be wrong, right? Because sometimes something's going to happen. There's going to be a drought. It's going to push back your time frame. But without defining those clear goals and having a time frame for measuring your success, it's really hard to measure and to track back against how you're doing. And the measurement actually influences your strategic decision-making process, right? How do you raise money? Do you use crowdfunded capital, or do you go for an angel investment capital? Or do you self-fund and you not even, in the Lift economy, even though we work in the realms of capital and finances, we often say the best capital to raise is no capital at all, right? To have this, a business that is actually fueling on its own growth and self-sufficient and resilient in that way. So right now, what I want to do is actually take you through how Lift Economy has crafted our vision, just as an exercise for you to think about how this is relevant to your own enterprises. And I'm so curious, too, to hear what type of enterprises you're crafting right now in this moment in time. So maybe we can take a moment after I go through my vision or our vision at Lift Economy to hear from you. But our vision is really an economy, a bioregional economy, where all the functional human needs are met largely met by local resources. So I'm from the Petaluma River watershed. It's situated in Sonoma County, which is about 40 minutes north from the San Francisco Bay Area. And so my purpose is working and creating that bioregional economy in Sonoma County and sort of pulling together the pieces of how we can meet our needs in a way that doesn't extract and exploit from other communities in other regions of the world, but is actually self-sufficient to this bioregion. So notice that didn't have any specific goals or timeframes, so we've pared that down into different phases. And the first phase of executing that vision, that really large, we call it our 500-year vision, which I think, everyone, I'm so heartened when I hear other people working towards this 500-year vision, because it's so important that we think, 7 generations forward and not just get steeped in the current era that we're in. And so the very first, the itty bitty 1 to 5 year way that we manifest that vision is we work with companies. We help them grow. We actually roll up our sleeves and we're doing the nuts and bolts of helping companies raise capital, helping companies define their vision and goals, helping companies, do sales and get more customers. Phase 2, and this is where crowdfunding comes in. So about a year and a half ago, Lyft Economy brought on an amazing woman named Jenny Casson to our team, and many of you may have heard of her work because she's a lawyer and she's been completely preoccupied and committed to the question of what are the other avenues for raising capital apart from venture capital. So many of you probably know of the venture capital of raising investment. And from Lyft Economy's perspective, what we've observed is that people, social entrepreneurs that are invested in this next economy, that are working in the next economy, often have very concessionary and beautiful and regenerative outcomes that they wish to see in the world. And the outcomes typically demanded by venture capital just to fuel the system, and in a moment I'll explain, just so we're all literate about how venture capital work, typically are toxic to those beautiful, regenerative, nourishing, community-building outcomes that so many social entrepreneurs seek. How many metric liters of water recharged into the aquifer, how many pounds of food produced in carbon sequestering no-till manners, how many jobs, livelihood jobs do social entrepreneurs wish to create. Typically the mandates of venture capital are a bit at odds with those metrics, because venture capital inherently, just so we're all on the same page around the literacy of venture capital, what happens in venture capital is a fund manager comes up with the idea to create a fund, and they go out and they fundraise for that fund. So they'll go out and ask people, typically some foundations, corporate foundations, endowments, for money to support that fund that they can then loan out, invest in other companies. But what happens, in order to raise that funding, the fund manager actually has to make a promise. You have to make a promise to those people that manage those large amounts of resources, typically in the millions we're talking. They have to make a promise to pay back those resources in its entirety, plus typically 30% IRR or more. And what that means is that because when they invest, there's no guarantee that their investments are going to be solvent, that they're going to pay back the fund, the loan or the equity that was invested in its entirety. That means that they have to be seeking companies with a growth trajectory that's pretty excessive and exorbitant, or they have to force those companies to seek outsized returns, to maximize profit over people and planet. And so while there are some venture capital models that do have different metrics that do incorporate, social and environmental metrics, the inherent nature, the inherent relationship that is set up through venture capital is inherently toxic to the outcomes that we like to see in a next economy. And so a portion, the kind of Lift 2.0 phase, which we're in right now, is to raise our own investment fund that's not equity-based, it's actually debt-based. So we loan out with very concessionary interest rates, loan money to companies that we believe are in the forefront of creating that next economy. And here's where the crowdfunding comes in. So we believed that many other people shared this vision with us, and we believed that we could actually crowdfund people who would want to contribute to this $1 million fund. And we believe that there were so many people out there that they themselves don't have $100,000 to loan out to an entrepreneur building these replicable solutions for climate change, for the degradation of ecosystems, to solve the challenges of that we find in our communities, of the polarization, the growing wealth divide. But that, they may have $5,000, $10,000 to invest, not the full $100,000. And it worked. This year we raised more than $400,000, crowdfunded capital. We used a platform called WeFunder. And you can raise that amount from non-accredited investors through a platform that is online, just like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. But it's actually a loan that can then be paid back to those investors, and they get a really small, 2% return on their investment. So maybe I'll pause there. That was a lot to take in. I'm going to go now into the types of investment that we're looking for and that we're actively doing due diligence around with that investment fund, because I think it's really exciting to hear where this money has the potential to go. But if you have further questions around crowdfunding, there's a lot of steps to take in advance, and in advance of starting a crowdfunding. And the very first question to ask yourself is, how much money do I need to raise? And the way to answer that question, at the end of this presentation, hopefully we'll have some time to actually go through, and I'll open up a operations model, and I can actually show you how we make projections, how we take assumptions and do sales projections. And I'd be happy to work with entrepreneurs that are actively in that inquiry of how much money do I actually need to raise through a crowdfunding campaign. A couple of people asked about how do I get the capital needs for developing infrastructure on my property when I'm also faced with a big mortgage or debt. And this is a really important question, and it really comes down to identifying what it is that you need, how much you need, and doing your financial projections, your sales projections, so that you can see the payback over time. These are some of our principles of this fund, of how we're filtering the investment. And I'm just skipping over this. The reason we're focusing on women and people of color is that these are the areas that are typically the most marginalized from the conventional capital stack. So we're trying to address that equity piece there. So our typical investee is going to be earning between $250K to $1 million annual revenue, and we're investing in an 8-year loan, yeah, we don't have to go into all those details, but these are some of the people that we're conducting, the enterprises we're conducting due diligence on right now. 10 Power is an amazing woman-owned, they're seeking to be a worker-owned company that they actually invest in community-owned solar installations on water filtration plants in Haiti, and and this is just a remarkable way to get community-owned solar that has a pretty impressive payback to provide clean water to communities. Tonka bar, I don't know if you can still see me, but Tonka is an amazing, amazing product that you can actually buy in the market that the proceeds are going directly to support Native-owned communities. So the proceeds go back to Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. And I firmly believe that as a general rule of thumb, we definitely need to reduce our meat consumption kind of on a global, planetarily, and also certainly in the U.S. But there are, as with permaculture, it depends, right? Because there are these outliers of buying pasture-raised meats from from purveyors in your own community that are actively using cattle to mimic the restoration ecology of the bison that roam the Great Plains, and so purchasing and supporting those entrepreneurs and sourcing your meat from someone within your bioregion 100 miles away is a great solution, and actually potentially a more climate beneficial way to eat than if you were to source the bulk of your protein from grain or from further away. So it always depends. But for this, we're looking at investing in Tonka sustainable agriculture, which would be actually investing in some of the buffalo hide, the groups of buffalo to put buffalo back on to these Indian reservations and have more native folk be able to own their own. I'm blanking on the word. What do you call a big group of buffalo? Help me out. Herds. Herd shares. Yes, we're investing. We would be investing in the herds. So right now we're in due diligence around that solution. And then I'll just for the fun of it, these are our 10 to 35 year milestones and the 30 to 75 year milestones. Actually having an incubator where we observe the gaps in our communities and actually hire and design the business to fulfill those gaps, and then actually having a holding company in the way future. So I have about 3 more enterprises that I'd like to shine some light on, and then I'd love to pause and hear from some of your enterprises. So this is an enterprise that is right here in my own backyard, near and dear to me. This is an Iraq war veteran who started a company making small batch, high quality cloth made from American-grown fibers. He's quite a machinist and he loves old vintage machines. So these are vintage American-made machines that he's bringing back to life. Frankly, there's not a lot of people in the U.S. Domestically that are looking at our existing infrastructures for bringing back a regional fiber and industry. And so I won't go too deeply into it, but I do have a background in fibers and textiles, and I love this idea that a friend of mine, Rebecca Burgess with FiberShed, she's the founder of FiberShed, and she envisions bringing back a bioregional textile economy to California, modeling it in California, and all through the while, right now she's actually writing a book with Chelsea Green called FiberShed, to replicate that model, that way of designing an economy to every fiber shed throughout the world. And FiberShed really is reminding us of the watershed metaphor, right? The watershed being the place in which we are bounded by, in which our water comes from. FiberShed thinking about what are the boundaries within which our fibers come from. Currently, in my community, certainly, most of our fibers are being sourced in really extractive ways from communities around the world globally. And we need to find a better way to clothe ourselves, because the textile industry, after agriculture, is the second largest contributor to global water pollution worldwide after agriculture. Pretty stark outcomes for what the textile industry is contributing on our planet right now. So here's an alternative, and I have here some California cloth from Ryan Houston, and it's made out of wool. So California is actually one of the largest wool producing states in the country. We produce tremendous amounts of wool, millions of pounds, and yet we're a net importer of wool goods, which is nonsensical when you think about it. We're producing all this wool, shipping it to Texas, goes to clearinghouses, and then gets shipped to India and China, and then returned to California in the form of end-use wool goods. So what if we could do it, all of that in-house in California? And Brian is doing this. That's why I wanted to bring him up. So you can actually support him. You can buy fabric from him. But every bioregion in the world can have this type of local, decentralized manufacturing infrastructure. And if you want to learn more, fibershed.com is a great resource. Fibershed is also working with a group of hemp growers in Kentucky. And in fact, Grist named Mike Lewis, who's the founder of Growing Warriors, one of the top 50 most inspiring entrepreneurs this year. And that image on the left there is an image of an American flag, a American-grown American flag, using hemp fibers and wool fibers and indigo dye and beautiful red madder root to craft those colors there. It's a little bit distracting. I hope the noise wasn't too distracting for you all, because I am at the Permaculture Skills Center, and so we have amazing farmers walking through here. We are a production site. We have a no-till carbon sequestering farm right here, and we also have a flower farm. And I'll talk a little bit about Permaculture Skills Center too. So this is actually a realm where there actually is a need for further investment and development, and that's where, Lift Economy, we would love to step in here and support Mike Lewis. Currently, it's a nonprofit that's training veterans in hemp cultivation and working in partnership with Fibershed to innovate these product lines like this American flag, like Kentucky-grown cloth, and they're also partnering with the University of Kentucky to grow hemp on former mountaintop coal removal sites to actually draw down carbon and restore carbon stocks to those really degraded landscapes. And they're seeing some really good signs that's actually a viable means to restore these degraded landscapes. But Lyft earlier this year worked with Growing Warriors to actually develop an operations model to look at how we could actually raise investment and invest in an entity that would actually turn Kentucky-grown hemp, blend it with wool, because hemp and wool blended together makes an incredible fiber. Probably many of you know that better than even I on this call. And it's an incredible fiber. So how could we replace some of our current cotton and other extractive fibers with these fibers? Hemp and wool combined together, they actually can be catalysts for carbon sequestration. Hemp grows from seed to stalk 11 feet tall in 2 months in Kentucky summer rains. So no additional irrigation apart from summer rains, and that's sequestering a ton of carbon. Not literally a ton, but a lot of carbon, as well as wool, when managed appropriately. Sheep and alpaca and on landscapes can actually catalyze the regenerative potential for that forage to sequester carbon. Are any questions coming up before I dive into ocean restoration? It feels like I should pause and see if either Neil or Raleigh, you have any questions, or if audience
This
members
is
do.
all fantastic. Oh, so much. Like you're bringing the piece of like the business puzzle that most people completely glaze over, and you're bringing that out to the light. And I really thank you for doing that. And really cool seeing these companies. These are fantastic. But here is how about there's two questions. There's a bunch of questions, but I'll let 2 or 3 be answered right now. First one is from Billy Van Kuren. He's asking about regulations. He says, how do I navigate the local, state, federal laws to create the regenerative economy that reaches my consumers without resulting in trouble with the laws?
This is great. I'm so glad you asked that. It's such an important question, and it's actually why we brought on Jenny Casson, who is a lawyer. She technically can't be a partner or worker owner because as a lawyer she can't be a part of an LLC, but she does business as Lyft Economy Legal, and she supports entrepreneurs to addressing and answering those legal questions. She started a nonprofit called the Sustainable Economies Law Center. It's based in Oakland, but they have colleagues that work around the country. And frankly, I feel like every community needs a Sustainable Economies Law Center. I'd be happy to talk more about this with the person, I think it was Billy, who asked the question. Feel free to email me at erin@lifteconomy.com. But Lyft Economy, Jenny specializes in answering people's legal questions about fundraising and capital raising and how to do that legally in ways that are apart from the venture capital typical mainstream ways of funding. There's so many amazing ways to raise capital that support your goals and don't detract from them. So everything from doing pre-sales of goods to doing a direct public offering to doing a crowdfunded investment. And Jenny really is the expert in that. I can kind of steer people in the direction of what they should ask Jenny about, but she really is who we go to for those questions. With regards to things like growing hemp, certainly the reason why Rebecca Burgess, who lives in West Marin, grew up here as a multi-generation inhabitant of this bioregion. The reason why we're partnering with places like Kentucky and the San Luis Valley in Colorado, one of the poorest agricultural districts in the country, is that those are the places where it's currently legal to grow industrial hemp. And whereas in California, although we're moving policy forward, and I would say Dr. David Bronner, the owner of Dr. Bronner's, has been an incredible advocate for hemp. John Rulak, CEO of Nutiva, there are a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators who are trying to move California policy forward to be able to grow hemp here in California. And we can grow hemp for research purposes, but from an industrial standpoint, that's why we're partnering with Colorado and Kentucky, and that's why FiberShed is focusing there. But I do definitely encourage you and ask you to keep a healthy awareness around your laws without getting too distracted by them. I'll give just an example. Kevin Bayuk, the co-founder of Lyft Economy, who is also a permaculture educator, often talks about this dynamic where what we've observed when it comes to doing things that are perceived to be illegal or technically are illegal is there's the formal laws, and then there's the kind of informal culture or community laws. And it's important to be literate in both, because what we've found to be the case sometimes is that when working in this next economy system and working with solutions that are sometimes perceived to be just so fringe or so not normal to our current economy, sometimes a permaculture designer can put in a system that is absolutely to code. It could be a gray water system that it perfectly meets all the requirements of the California State Code. And they would still get a nosy neighbor who isn't literate about gray water, who perceives it as a blight to their community. And that nosy neighbor would actually win out and cause that appropriate permaculture designer to have a cease and desist for that installation, that project, just by the nature of airing an alert and contacting the city. Whereas if you actually do your permaculture design and you assess the landscape and you develop community and you build community, oftentimes you can have something that technically is not to code, and it won't have any problems in your community because you're working with the informal code. And I'm not really advocating to do anything illegal, more just noticing that sometimes you can do something completely legal and still you'll have to stop, take it apart, just by the nature of there's a lot of people that we need to call in and bring on board in our legal structures and in our regulator structures as well, that they're not as versed about the codes sometimes as the most educated gray water installers. There's one more point that I wanted to make about legality, and it'll come back to me, but it's a great question to navigate this terrain. And actually, when I worked with Daliax, it was grassroots organizers that pushed policy forward for gray water, and now you don't even need to get a permit to install a laundry to landscape gray water system in California. For more information about that, go to graywateraction.org. And now we're pushing that bar forward with composting toilets here in Occidental, the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center. So really being literate about what are the other sectors and influences in your community that can help you kind of change the legal ecosystem to pave the way for more innovators and entrepreneurs to follow. It's actually a great question. Maybe Raleigh, if I could segue to ocean farming, it's actually a great segue.
Erin, can I jump in on that real quick?
Yeah.
Can I just take a minute of your time?
Please. Oh, I love that. Yes.
Billy, I mean, we're all assuming you're not doing like regenerative opium farming or something, but right? Because we can't.
Regenerative meth farming.
Right? This is a sustainable meth lab. But what I've found working in a very, very different legal system from the one I grew up in, and because we do have people from multiple different countries here, the local is more important when you're starting out than the state or federal, because if you're in keeping with the state and federal but not the local, you're going to get shut down the fastest. And then if you see yourself expanding to outside of your local economy to state and federal, then you've got to comply with those. But first you've got to worry about local. And there are a number of examples of people who have changed the local laws. The one that I like the most is Brad Lancaster, who started vandalizing city property by cutting curbs on the side of the road so that when it rained, the water from the roads would go into these side of the street planters. But he was literally cutting up government property in this kind of artistic way. But now, and this was is he in Tucson or Phoenix? I think he's in Tucson.
Yep.
But now Tucson City has changed the laws so that not only is that allowed, but all new streets being built are being built in the way he designed it, because he developed so much local capital, like his social and his political capital around this thing, and the benefits that he showed from this were so great that even if the city had wanted to shut him down eventually, it would have come at extreme political cost to the city, because all the people saw how beneficial it was.
Yeah.
And so there are, that's one example. Another thing is, you sometimes when you're banging your head against the political system, it's your head that's going to break and not the politics. Yeah. Sometimes you really just got to bend around these things or rethink your enterprise, or else you're just going to end up fighting an unwinnable fight that's going to suck up all your energy and not leave you able to do anything else.
Yeah.
When I have been in a position like that, I have either bribed somebody or I have just moved on. All right? Depending on what the local politics of bribery are, that may not be an option for you. And that's all I've got to say about that. That's my 2 cents on that issue.
I'm so grateful that you said that, because Brad Lancaster is actually, we've totally tiptoed on the heels of the good work he's done in Tucson here in Sonoma County. And we owe him just a tremendous amount for his vision. But it does, you did remind me of what I wanted to mention, which is, as permacultures, we have this toolkit of really, really high-level design. And so oftentimes, even if you're doing something that's technically not covered under the code right now, if you design it in such a way that you get so much community buy-in, and Brad Lancaster is a perfect example of that, if you design it in such a way that you get the cultural credibility and the cultural norms to get bought in because it just fulfills a need in the community, oftentimes that's where regulators will actually hop on board because they see that you've solved a problem for them. So that's where permaculture really becomes an incredible design toolkit. So yeah. Great. So I'll segue to this ocean restoration idea and concept, and I have to just give a tremendous nod to the organization greenwave.org and the founder of that, Bren Smith, who is based in Long Island, and I'll do probably poor justice. You have to go and see his, he has lots of videos online that actually are well worth spending some time to watch. He is a lifelong fisherman, and he fished the cod stocks off of Newfoundland, the Grand Banks, and saw actually the cod stocks decline. He was there when they actually fell out and left a lot of fishermen jobless. Went to see if he could find a different way that existed on the planet because he loves fishing. He loved the thrill of that culture, that way of life, and so went to aquaculture. And he now calls aquaculture the Ohio pig farms of the ocean. Really same sort of pattern of really, just concentrated nutrient inputs from far away, pumping fish with antibiotics and hormones, and thought, oh my God, what are we doing? This is just as bad as, open trawling the ocean. So he became an oysterman in Long Island, New York, and that's where he innovated this model of 3D restorative ocean farming, where he actually was creating a polyculture farming method with kelp, oysters, mussels, clams, all working together to grow a tremendous amount of food. He's growing 10 to 30 tons of seaweed per acre in open ocean. The installations that he uses are actually serving as storm barriers to protect against storm surges, to protect coastlines, and really viable for small farmers in terms of the capital needed. You don't need a lot of capital to buy land. You just need to lease land. You require a boat and maybe $30,000 for some infrastructure to get started. And the demand for seaweed, seaweed is one of those things that it's in a lot of our foods already. We've got We've got it in ice creams as a thickener, carrageenan as a thickener. We've got, demand for seaweed snacks. People are looking for plant-rich ways to bolster their diet and actually source trace minerals, because a lot of our soil-based cropping systems are highly depleted of trace minerals. So we need to have that. The seaweed is actually really healthy. And I've been a seaweed forager personally for about 7 years, ever since I started working at Daily Axe. And I always forage every year, every June, I go out and forage my seaweed needs for the rest of the year. But so when we're looking at climate change and ocean acidification, the thing that really gets me excited about this solution is that because we're pumping so much carbon into the atmosphere through the very nature of our economy currently, the atmosphere is becoming saturated with carbon dioxide, as you all know, and it's cycling that into the oceans. So our oceans are acidifying because of carbonic acid. And kelp actually thrives in acidic environments. I actually had the fortune to travel to San Diego earlier actually in April last month, and travel with 2 marine biologists who graduated from Humboldt State University, and learn from them, and also learn from researchers at the University of Ensenada in Baja, Mexico. Pepe Zarducci, who is a researcher, a phycologist, they call him, studying kelp. And kelp actually thrives in acidic waters. It grows 6 times more quickly than land-based plants, so that means it's sequestering 6 times more carbon than land-based plants. And it's something that we can eat. We can eat it not just as a sort of fringe part of our diet, but we can actually, there are a lot of chefs now innovating kelp as a staple part of our diet. So how do we implement these solutions quite rapidly in a planet that desperately needs them? And draw down, I'll just show it again, this book by Paul Hawken, and a team of almost 200 scientific researchers around the globe. And in fact, Kevin Bayuk, the co-founder of Lift Economy, was integral in tracking and doing the financial modeling for this list of 100 solutions. So he was there behind the spreadsheets, pulling together all the data. The 100 solutions listed in this book, and Eric Toensmeyer, I have to give a shout out to him too. He wrote the carbon farming solution, which was critical as well into producing drawdown. And Eric was one of the fellows doing the research around silvopasture, which is listed, I think, solution number 11, and regenerative agriculture and systems of SRI, systems of rice cultivation. So Eric Toensmeyer, Kevin Bayuk, all of this modeling has actually, highlighted that ocean farming is one of the solutions. So how do we go about implementing? And that's where greenwave.org really comes in. They're a nonprofit dedicated to moving policy forward around making ocean farming, this restorative ocean farming, more accessible to communities. But they're modeling it right now on Long Island. They have greenwave.org, and then they have a for-profit arm that actually purchases the seaweed from the farmers, the beginning farmers that they've trained and planted on ocean farms. The for-profit arm purchases seaweed from those farmers, distributes it, packages it, sells it to companies like Google, high-end restaurants in New York City. And so the partnership between the nonprofit, which actually owns the intellectual property, if you will, the method of ocean farming, they own it so that they can ultimately open source it. And then the for-profit, which essentially owns the distribution of and allows it to be that the seaweed farmers are focusing on the farming and not focusing on all the sales and marketing and aspects of actually getting their product to market. Greenwave, the reason why Bren Smith is so brilliant and why he needs support, actually, if you know any ocean philanthropists or anyone that is looking to invest their resources in moving this project, this idea forward, I'd say Green Wave is really the most strategic entity right now on the planet, looking for how to strategically move every bioregion, every coastal bioregion in the U.S. forward into each having their own 3 restorative ocean farm by every major metropolitan coastal city. And Bren Smith just came back from Korea, where he met with hundreds of other phycologists and ocean researchers, and he was just observing this lack within this ocean ecosystem of viable economic models. That's where Bren's brilliance is that he's created a viable economic model. We have our own here in Sonoma County, Marin County. We have Hog Island Oyster Company, which is doing not seaweed farming, but oyster farming, which also have really incredible ecosystem benefits to an ecosystem, and cleaning the water, filtering particulate, catalyzing more growth for seagrass, which does do a lot of carbon sequestration as well in coastal ecosystems. But Bren, the people that are at the forefront of innovating viable economic models in ocean restoration are very few and far between, and Bren Smith is one of those. That's why I bring him up. We're starting, but we need to be very strategic about how those models get piloted in California, because we have a lot of regulatory hurdles with the Coastal Commission, rightly so. We have these institutions that are really meant to protect our oceans and our coastal zones. But one of my favorite people in California working on it is a man by the name of Dan Marquez. And he has a company called Farmercy, Farmer, P-H-A-R-M-E-R, Farmercy. And he is, the reason I bring him up is he has lived in Santa Barbara his whole life, and he used to swim through the kelp forests that were 5 to 10 miles wide off the coast of California. And we have nothing near, we have maybe 1 mile wide stretches. We have nothing near that density of kelp that was creating all kinds of habitat for otters and seals and sea lions. And so we're really in a conundrum where the protections that have been put in place to protect our ocean ecosystems aren't actually working. We actually have a lot of healing and restoration that needs to be done, and so that's why we're so excited by the Green Wave model and actively seeking where the opportunities are to bring investors and philanthropists together to invest in aspects like this. I'm going to pause there, and Raleigh, do you have any other questions that are coming up for folks?
Oh, I'm sure we definitely got a lot of questions. Oh man, Pepperwood, I love. It was funny. I was the one of the first grazers at Pepperwood Preserve. Like, I talked to Erin. I was like, I'll do it, and that was a tough ass job. But I have so much respect for Ariel for sticking it out for years and restoring that beautiful place.
I'm going to have a little bit of background noise for a moment, so maybe I'll mute myself
and
the
about it.
Questions.
Okay, so yeah, everybody, if you got some questions coming on in, ask away. So let's go back up a bit. Here we go. Question from Roberto was price parity paradox. A good solution that I've come across is Blue Economy by Gunter Pauli. Have you come across it? You're muted right now, so if you want to answer that, you got to unmute your mic.
Could you repeat that question one more time? I didn't quite catch it.
It was basically, it was about the price parity paradox. He said a good solution that he's come across is the Blue Economy by Gunter Pauli. Have you heard about Blue Economy?
Yeah, absolutely. Have heard about the Blue Economy. And maybe in a minute I'll actually talk about some of the strategies. I don't think I could talk about it as specifically about what Gunter Pauli is doing right now, but I could talk about some solutions that I've seen working for the price parity paradox. One of which is actually, it goes back to this democratic ownership structure. So right now, one of the reasons we have a price parity paradox is we have different people, different middlemen working at the economic level at each of the different elements of the supply chain, right? So growing the corn, processing the corn, turning it into high fructose corn syrup, and you know, we have this really extractive kind of supply chain that way. But it's scaled so big and gotten so cheap. So how do we, as individual producers, compete on that level? And one of the ways to do that is actually through democratic ownership. We love to look at the models out there at Lift Economy that are actually called multi-stakeholder cooperatives, where not only are, like Organic Valley would be an example of a producer cooperative, but what if we could actually innovate models where there's both the producers own a part of the infrastructure to grow the crop, but also the consumers own a portion of the infrastructure to produce a given crop. And by doing multi-stakeholder worker cooperatives, I'd just like to call out, there's a company called Our Harvest in Sherwood, Oregon. And what they do is they have producers and consumers and investors all owning a portion of that entity. It's a multi-stakeholder worker-owned cooperative. What that means is they are able to collectively decide how to price according to all their diverse interests, right? The producers are interested in living wage jobs, and the consumers are interested in affordable foods, and they actually come together and agree on a price that both floats the business and keeps the business solvent and meets each of their independent needs. And it's actually that process of deciding together what the pricing structure should be and working together to strategically address what the costs of producing that good is that allows that to compete against you know, the other. What I will say about the price parity paradox is it's not going to get solved overnight, right? This is something that's so entrenched into hundreds of years of a way we've done business that it is a sort of a long game look at how we can transition our economic system. But there are strategies that Lift Economy talks about, and I don't really have time to go into all of them. Another strategy would be vertical integration. In some cases, vertical integration can allow you to reduce costs just by the nature of your entity. And maybe this was the case for the mesquite farmer, actually, but just by the nature of keeping it in-house, keeping the vertical integration, you don't have to pay other service providers to do processing, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, great. Thanks for bringing up Gunter Pauli. That's an amazing model. And I'm so curious, actually, it came across my radar quite a while ago, probably 5-6 years ago. So I'm so curious to see what is coming up now for his work.
Okay, great question. Here's another one from Andrew Shindiapan. He asks, how to gauge customer demand, interest, and what they want. So,
great.
Market research question.
Market research. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. I'm going to skip over culture. Okay, let's see. And I'm going to go to strategy. So the most typical questions that we get are from entrepreneurs is, I need more resources, I need more customers, and I need a better team. And in Lift Economy, we actually talk about, I'll go back a few slides actually, we talk about something called the known needs and the actual needs. The known needs are what you as a business, what your customers are, and there's kind of two different levels to think about this. One, the known needs are what you as an entrepreneur, you know you need more resources, you know you need more customers, you know you need a better team. Those are kind of the most frequent ones that we get asked to explain. And so this one about customers is a great one, because certainly you do need to have a clear picture of the market. And there's two different ways to identify your kind of total addressable market. One is kind of top down, looking at, okay, how many people in my community fit my target customer, my target market description, and what percentage of those people do I think I can reach with my service? And then there's the bottom up assessing of your customer base, which is actually the place that I find to be most effective and it's most interesting, which is actually surveying who are the existing customers that are already coming to me and purchasing my product, that are actually I've already made a sell to them. I've already closed a deal. And why? Really understanding deeply what it is about your particular product that is meeting a need for them. And so when I talk to entrepreneurs about sales, I like to talk about known needs versus actual needs as well, when they're interfacing with their customers, because so often I see entrepreneurs that are coming to me with a solution that is very much needed in the community, but most of their customers don't actually know they need it, right? So it's kind of a delicate balance. What I mean by that is you could have a product that clearly fulfills a need. Clearly, we all need more livable, non-toxic, walkable communities. And you might have a product that actually absolutely fulfills that. It's a map of all the green spaces in your community that people can go to forage their food, and to find a non-toxic workspace, and to find someone who can help them with their energy needs or their non-toxic needs within their house. It would be a community map. Maybe that's the product. And an entrepreneur will come to me and be diehard committed that this is something that the world needs. And it's true. The world probably does absolutely need that. But are people aware that they need it? Are people actually expressing in the market, gosh, I really wish I had a map that would show me? Sometimes, and oftentimes actually, the case is that these entrepreneurs who are so visionary are actually not using their permaculture toolkit, but are imposing, this is what the world needs, and it's true, but they're not being responsive to the explicit needs, or in conventional business 101, we'd call it pain points, that are being expressed from their customer base. In permaculture, there's the principle, compose with rather than impose upon. And what's really important in doing any sales and marketing is interview. Interview. Survey every person who's ever called you, who's ever emailed you, to understand first what we call it the leads process or the pipeline, what that looks like, how they're feeling or sensing when they go to your website and take action, what catalyzes them to take action and reach out to you, and then in sales, why are they buying your product? What is the pain point that your product is fulfilling that's meeting their known needs? You could have this whole in your vision and in your business design, you could have a component that is actually meant to be educational and to educate people about what they actually need and move them from this place of just making purchases on their known needs. But initially, you have to fulfill their known needs, which are called their pain points. And the best way, the most cost-effective, and frankly best, I talk to a lot of businesses that are wanting to spend $3,000 on a market research survey. It's not going to cut it for you. There's so much more cost-effective way to get that information is to survey your existing customer base. I'll just point out, this is a client of mine, MycoWorks, and when I came on board with them, they got 2 million views on a featured on Science Friday on NPR. They're making a leather alternative grown out of fungi. And when I came on board as a consultant with them about, I don't know if you can see this, but this is the leather alternative.
Cool.
When I came on board about 6 months ago, they had all these people contacting them and tons of hubbub and enthusiasm about their product, and they hadn't done a survey. And now we just, with almost zero time other than the same time that they were using to respond to all these big products, big brands inquiring about the way to purchase the product, making very little changes other than just adding a survey link into the email response that we sent back. We now have over almost 70 brands, companies from around the globe that have given us really, really explicit market research data around what price they're currently paying for leather, why they are interested in a vegan, non-animal based alternative leather, and all the basic things you need for market research just by crafting a survey, using technology, using Google Forms, and sending it out and taking the time. I hope that answered the question. That we could go. There's so much more I want to get into around market and surveying, but we're going to run out of time. I'm noticing. So
that's tough. That's such an insanely important part it's glossed over a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to do another question? Or do you want to keep going?
Yeah, I would love to hear also. Maybe it would be good. Have people shared what enterprises they're working on? Are most people in the producer trying to grow farms or agriculture products? Do you have a sense, Raleigh, from who's on the webinar? And maybe feel free to just type in the chat. I'm trying to start a business. I'm trying to start a perennial food. Perennial berry business. I'm trying to start whatever it is. I'd be curious to just do a survey of what people are innovating.
Let's do it real quick. Just type it in the questions box, folks. Tell us what enterprises you're working on.
All right. Yeah, good idea.
I'll tell you mine. I'm trying to create a number of value-added products based on what we're growing in Saudi Arabia, primarily off of moringa oil. And so we're looking primarily at skin and hair care products that we're developing. We're developing recipes right now, but hoping to launch by the end of the year.
Awesome.
That's the enterprise I'm working on.
Amazing. Yeah.
Cool. So we got some folks, and Sherry had a great question. I'll have to go back to that. She was like, we need to create a few mastermind groups, and that is such a good idea. But
can we use the Facebook group that you...
Yeah, that's a good way to initiate it. I'll put the link up in the chat box. Again, I encourage everyone. Let me post that right now. Please join the Facebook group. It can be the start of a mastermind or being able to share what you're working on in your own webinar. It's a really great resource, and we're going to post the webinar here later. They're later for free on replay, and you'll be able to ask more questions to Erin on the Facebook group too.
So let me read these off to you real quick, Erin.
Go for it.
We've got somebody doing a fitness enterprise. We've got someone who's looking at supporting green businesses from the fundraising side of things, so raising capital. Regenerative landscaping. Two folks for regenerative landscaping. Artisan dairy production. Fermented vegetables in New Jersey. Conservation and food education. We have a silvopasture farmer who's focused on energy descent. Yeah, we've got a good diversity of folks here. Someone who works with farmers transitioning from chemical to biological ag. Agri-food job training for at-risk girls and women. Right? It's pretty cool stuff.
I want to collaborate with all of you, and please, so I think what I'd love to do, boy, there's so much to go over, but I think keeping with the lens of business design will help all of you. What we've done at Lift Economy is we've crafted sort of a system, an iterative design system that is really, we customize it to all the different enterprises, but it's really relevant no matter whether you're doing a service enterprise or a product-oriented enterprise. I'm or an education enterprise. I love this woman who's teaching women and girls agriculture, and definitely reach out to me because I work really closely with the Permaculture Skills Center to plant farmers. And so we have a curriculum that we use to incubate, and we've now incubated 9 farms over 2 years in our community that are providing goods and services to our community. And I always love to work with companies that are innovating ways to create our material goods culture in ways that are regenerative. But so going back to this design system, the very, very first exercise is, in whatever way works for you, whether it's going for a walk, using an Excel template, a spreadsheet, make sure that your vision is supported by specific and measurable goals. And I'll just reiterate that the reason why is that then you can share that with people coming on your team, and they can immediately see, oh, this really aligns with my own personal passion, or, oh, this is really not the direction I want to be headed with my life. And just by the nature of having that explicit vision, and maybe they bring in another element to the vision, and you decide, oh, yeah, I want to incorporate that into my vision. But going through that exercise to make sure that you're aligned is such an important part. The top 2 reasons across the hundreds of companies we work with over the years for failures, number 1, interpersonal conflict and interpersonal dynamic. That's top number 1 reason for failure that we see in the next economy, in the realm of social enterprise. Number 2, lack of resources. So that's why we focus so much on clearly explicit vision, culture, developing a culture of tolerance and nonviolent communication and team building. And that's why we also focus so much on asking people to create their operations projections, and I'll open that up in a moment, and we'll actually walk through an operations projections for this hemp project that I worked on, as well as raising capital in innovative ways. So that's why those are such big passions about us. But always think about vision, culture, strategy, operations as like the buckets that you're working in. And when we think about sort of like the pyramid of how you're expending your energy, the vast majority of your time, 80% of your time, should be in delivery of your services, but 10% of your time should be in this vision. That you've all heard the adage, working on the business, not in the business. So you do need to take some time, and best case scenario is not taking a lot of time, but doing it regularly, scheduling into your calendar. Every 3 months, I'm going to take a day, I'm going to go for a hike, I'm going to revisit my vision, I'm going to check back against my metrics, how am I doing, and I'm going to make any pivots that I might need to make. And doing that with your team is really critical, really, really critical. But it's expensive, taking the time for your entire team to come together and do a visioning exercise. So you want to make sure it's well facilitated, and that's where bringing in a permaculture facilitator like members of our Lift team or others in your community is a really good exercise too. And I'd be glad to help support. We do remote facilitation and support companies in doing that from afar. So vision comes first. culture is next, and culture, at MicroWorks, one of the first things we did was actually come together and write out the vision so it was explicit, and identify the kind of cultural components that basically what is the kind of cultural norms and values and habits that they wanted to create, because so often if you don't explicitly define those, culture defaults to what we call the lowest common denominator, or like the pattern of behavior that just is kind of not serving the highest vision of your entity. So if you explicitly define, we're a culture of hard workers, we are frugal, we are resourceful, whatever it may be that like are the 1 to 3 key terms that describe the culture of your enterprise, the more you can use that and weave that into your day-to-day, the more aligned your team will be. And that'll come off in your sales pipeline, etc. I want to talk about Salt Lake Girls. This is an amazing entity that we just invested in with our Force for Good fund, but I want to get to, there's so much to cover. I think I want to go to the operations projection, and just show you kind of, this is one of the tools that we use. And then I'll go back and talk about Farm School. Here's that kind of pyramid that I referenced. The design portion of your business is the 10%, that yellow box, and then below that is your revenue. That's where 80% of your time should be spent. And then below that in the admin, that should be, again, trying to create and innovate systems that are just 10% of your time. But the bulk is in that revenue. Here is, let's go to this. Okay. So I hope everyone can see that all right. When you're raising capital, as I mentioned, the most important thing first is to identify how much capital you actually need to raise. And again, this goes back to one of the biggest challenges we see with entrepreneurs, why they don't do their vision, is because it's really hard to be wrong, right? We have some sort of cognitive dissonance around, oh, I can't be wrong. If I put it on paper and it's wrong, I failed. We want to just assure you, don't worry about that. You're going to be wrong. Embrace it, okay? That's not the purpose of creating a forecast. The forecast is meant to give you a tool to consistently incorporate feedback and redesign according to new information. And one of the things that we've seen tragically fail when people are raising capital is they create an operating forecast, an Excel model that's so complex that it can't be changed, and that gets them into a lot of trouble when they're actually working with investors, even the most values-aligned investors, because some investors will actually do the due diligence and look and actually try and crunch the numbers, and they'll want to change your numbers. So number one, when doing a financial operations projection, I just hope if there's one thing you take away from this webinar, please take this away. Make sure that your assumptions page on your spreadsheet is its own sheet, and that all your forecasts, your projections, are linked back to your assumptions sheet. What I mean by that is, if you see this little code here, change cells this color, do not change cells this color, when you create your formulas are going to be in blue, but all the pink cells are things that you can change. So if, when you're surveying your customers, you find that, boy, small brands just will not pay for a knit top at $45. They won't even pay, they want it for $40. And then the retail online, oh man, I'm making a lot of sales at, $85. This is good, this is solid, this is solvent. But if you ever needed to change your pricing structure for any reason, you can change it here, and it'll automatically, within a matter of minutes, update your operating projection. So I'll walk through this template, and feel free to ask questions as we go along. But this is such an important piece of the business, and this is a template that we would love to share with you. We actually have an online workshop that we host. So if people want to go dive deeper with the Lyft team, and not just hear from me, but hear from Kevin Bayuk and Jenny Casson and Ryan Honeyman and Sean Berry and Phoenix Soleil and all my other incredible team members, that would be a great way to get access to this. And I'd also just be happy to work with you to kind of customize these templates. The vision really is to have these templates be open source, so that people who are doing good work can use them. But sometimes it does take a little bit of almost always it takes a little bit of customization to use these really appropriately. But I'll just go quickly through this, not taking too much time. But essentially, the very first part of your assumptions is revenue, and then the second part is expenses. And I hope this is not too deep in the details. Some of you, this will be old hat, but I've seen it happen so many times that seasoned entrepreneurs don't build a model in a way that is nimble and versatile and really useful for raising capital. And this model works for raising capital. So I really want to just walk you through it quite quickly. So the first part of the revenue portion is actually identifying what is it that you sell, and at what price do you sell it. Pretty simple, right? Most of you will know this. For those of you that are just starting out, we had a few questions of what do I do when I'm just starting out? For those of you that are just starting out, this is a perfect place to experiment and explore the different pricing options and opportunities, even before you sell a product. Because what you can do is you can run several different models. We call it scenario planning, and you can examine what your cost of goods and your income streams are going to look like if you price it at this price versus this price. And you know the old adage, measure twice, cut once. Better, much more cost-effective way to do it on a spreadsheet than actually going out, buying all the labels, pricing all your products, and then finding out that it's not going to work. It's not actually covering your cost of goods, or it's at a price that's too high that the market would not bear. So there's a place that we put in for service fees. There's a place that we put in for goods. And this is really just very, very basic. Your price to your retailers, to your wholesale price, or your retail sale price. And when I go to our sales forecast, when I jump over there, you'll see that there's calculations where we look at revenue from wholesale and revenue from retail. And even if many of you are doing things that are not as typical or mainstream, this is it's still relevant. The principles are still relevant, and we can customize it to say, if your major product that you're delivering to market is, a fitness enterprise, you can just customize it. Your product then becomes a membership rather than a good. So the membership still has a cost to it. You're still going to project out, I wish to sell X number of memberships per month. And we really advocate, when we get to the sales forecast in a minute, we really advocate mapping it out month by month rather than quarterly. Of course, we have a section in the projection that aggregates it quarterly, but month by month, there's short enough time frames to really get your projections and get an iterative numbers so that you can be rapid iterating and rapid prototyping. If you only model it by quarterly, sometimes you get to a place where you've gone too far down the quarter and you've wasted a lot of money, and then you realize, oh shoot, I've been pricing that way too low, I'm not covering my cost of goods, and then you have a lot of makeup to do. So you list all your products. We can even add more rows than this if you have many products. I really advocate, though, when you're starting out, just start with one or two products. Start small, the permaculture principle, start small and grow from there, because it's really developing these practices of actually working with these systems is a learning curve in and of itself. because most entrepreneurs are just so accustomed to winging it and not doing these their systems. And so I really encourage people to start small and just start with a couple products to start with. So then this is for a hemp spinning mill. So we've got foreman, we've got washing, we've got pin drafting, roving, plying, and we have the costs of each of those, hourly wage and hours per month. And then we have your payroll taxes, your facilities overhead, production R&D, and then your financing costs. And then we have your COGS. So this is actually the neat thing about doing your COGS is it changes depending on how much you sell, right? So so you can also model in our expense forecast, which is a few tabs over, you can model out what your expenses will be according to how much you sell. And it's all easy and quick. Once you do the several hours to invest in building this model, the idea being that then every time you need to change, let's say you find a strategic partner and you can drop the cost of buying the wool, you can just change that right here on the model with a matter of minutes. You can have the different, you can see the picture of how that's going to change your entire business model. So I think that's enough there. I'm going to go over to the sales forecast. Actually, so this is the summary. This is where you'll see, and we'll go back to this at the end, but you'll see the summary of how all this filters in to give you the map for your revenue and expenses. But first we're going to go to the sales forecast. Sales forecast is really easy. It's just the hard part about it is, again, thinking that you're probably going to be wrong and not wanting to make any promises because of that. Don't worry about that. You're definitely going to be wrong. But very important to look and think about, okay, how many knit tops do I actually have the capacity to produce in a given month? And the reason why it's so important to do this is twofold. We have observed that entrepreneurs that take the time to do this, when they come in, they think that they know exactly what it's going to take to deliver their good or service to the market. And what we've found is oftentimes by going through this project, this process, they actually discover aspects that they didn't know that they didn't know. It's okay to not know, but it's really risky to not know what you don't know, right? So they've discovered that, oh shoot, I actually don't know how many hours it takes me to produce this knit top. And I just wasn't even factoring that in. I can't tell you how many entrepreneurs we've worked with over the years that don't factor in time it takes to pay themselves to deliver their goods or services. And that's important, right? If we're thinking about actually scalable models to affect large-scale economic change, if you actually want to bring more people onto your team, you have to pay them. And so you have to start getting in the mind frame of understanding how much it costs you to deliver your good or service to the market in order to be able to plan and forecast accordingly. So that's why it's so important to do this to really deeply understand your assumptions, and twofold, to that by that very exercise, you then understand your resource needs and can then go and speak eloquently with investors. Yep, we know we need this much money and this is why, and I can show you the forecast and the expense projection month by month, why and where we're going to spend that amount of money. Which takes me to the expense forecast, which is literally it will automatically tabulate your COGS based on the number of goods you inputted in your sales forecast, and then it captures all the assumptions from that initial assumptions page, and you just indicate how many staff you have on hand at a given time. And or if you want to input, it'll automatically capture your rent costs and put it in your expense forecast, and then that'll all get aggregated into your summary. So here's your summary. So we've got our revenue, that looks great. We've got our expenses, that looks great. Does anybody notice any problems with this summary? I notice a problem right off the bat, and that is that our cumulative earnings, we're actually losing money. And this is a total made-up scenario, so this is not actually any business right now. And so, okay, better to know that now than after you spent a year to 2 years of your life raising money from investors, and then find out that your business model is actually not profitable. The reason I show this scenario is that it's actually uncannily common that we find entrepreneurs that have not done this and have gotten themselves into a pickle of raising money and then finding that they don't have a profitable business model. And so really good to know that now when you're just sitting in front of your desk before you're actually out in your world and have debts and are in the nuts and bolts of the business, really important to know that, because then what we can do is just with the flick of our magic wand, we can either reduce these costs here for our cost of goods, or we can just increase our prices. So I can go in here and say, oh, well, I think I'm going to need to charge a little bit more for my products, and let's see if that changed it in a good way on the summary. Okay. Whew, I have earnings now. I have, wow, 26, just increasing my prices by $10 per product. I now am a solvent business, and I have what it takes to actually earn a little bit of money in my business. So there's a lot more to that, but I'll pause there because that was a lot to cover. Are questions coming up around this particular?
Not yet, Erin. I mean, this is great feasibility study stuff, but I think either you know how to do that or you don't.
Right. I think that's true, and I also really believe that more people in the permaculture and the restoration community would do very well to, and so I'll say that, maybe Raleigh, you and I can work together to share this operations projection, so we can actually have more people play around with it and use it.
Absolutely.
And I would love to do my best to support people if they're running into trouble, to move past the barrier of, oh shoot, I don't know Excel, therefore I can't project. It's really an incredible tool, and there's a lot of skills that we learn in order to run our businesses. We learn how to build a farm stand, even if we're not carpenters or woodworkers, because we need a place to sell our farm goods. And I've seen so many entrepreneurs be so entrepreneurial and adventurous in what they're willing to take on and learn in order to deliver their essential goods and services to the market. And I just want to encourage people to think about this as just one other, learning Excel and learning Google spreadsheets is just one other piece in your toolkit of solutions. And if you really don't want to do it, that's what Lift Economy is here for. We'd love to help support you to having this as a tool. And don't get me wrong, I don't love doing spreadsheets myself, but I know that I've saved people so much time, money, resources, burnout. The worst case scenario that I see so often is these really visionary entrepreneurs burning out because of lack of resources, because of lack of time. And I know that there's an element of the planning is best done in advance that can help address and alleviate some of these challenges. Let's see, where do I want to go to next? Let's see, how are we doing on time? Okay, we only have 15 minutes, so I'd really love to make sure that I'm addressing the questions that have come up for you. I want to make sure that this has been useful for you, if there's any lingering questions, and maybe if there's anything that people are calling out for to go back to just want to open it up to have some
We've got a question from Jorge, but I'm not. Jorge, can you rephrase that one? Can you rewrite that question? Because he says, I think, do you know of any businesses based on perennials that have this kind of approach? I think a lot of the ones that Erin just brought up will fit into that kind of model.
I would love to share a few others, though. I don't know them intimately, but I know Badger Set Research Corporation in the Midwest is growing nut crops, and Neil and Raleigh, you guys should chime in here too. Singing Frogs Farms in Sonoma County is one of my clients, and they do annual vegetable production, but they've planted over 4,000 perennial plants because they do a no-till method of farming, and they actually harvest much of what they put in the box are things like elderberries or other perennial herbs, and so that adding perennial herbs to your farm business plan can actually be a really viable way to incorporate both more resilient from an ecosystem, but also more resiliency from a financial standpoint. And I'll just mention one other, which is the Patagonia Provisions just launched a Kernza beer, which is made with perennial grains that have been innovated at the Land Institute for over 30 years, Salinas, Kansas. So I think there's some really cutting edge work in how to integrate perennials into our food systems, and I really encourage people to think both on a local level and then on a global level too. There's some really amazing work being done to have multi-strata perennial polyculture agroforestry. I know there's so many B Corps that I could list that are integrating perennial crops. Nutiva is one, using coconuts and making sure that coconut stands of intact coconut trees are remaining intact and not being deforested. So I think it's really important to think both globally as well, because there's a lot of deforestation that's happening. We're losing perennial tree cropping systems because of the demand for meat. Unfortunately, people have not caught on to silvopasture in the global. A lot of people in the global world were the leaders and innovators of silvopasture, and a lot of multinational corporations are coming in and thinking that cattle can only thrive in a non-tree zone, which is really unfortunate. And that makes me really sad, and so I love all businesses that are actively working not just at the local level, but actively catalyzing more silvopasture and tree reforestation on the global level as well.
Yeah, there's Tim asked about structures. He asked if you think a 501c3 structure is adequate for moving into the new economy.
That's a great question. At Lift Economy, we're typically somewhat agnostic about structure. There are plenty of great examples of nonprofits that have a for-profit revenue stream that coinciding that fuels that generates some of the revenue for that nonprofit. And what I would say is that regardless of whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit 501c3, you still have to have people that will pay you for goods or services or gift you for your goods or services. I see a lot of entrepreneurs starting nonprofits without a plan, without a strategic fundraising plan behind it. And Lyft, we help a lot of people think through what is your strategy, because we have seen plenty of people burn out by thinking that they had a really good idea in the market that many philanthropists would gift to, but not having any strategy or approach to how to reach those philanthropists or how to deeply understand why those philanthropists are giving to certain topic areas or theme areas as apart from others. I'm gonna pause and see if I can think of a really good example of a nonprofit that has a revenue stream associated with it. Let me come back to that. So certainly, in the realm of enterprise, you can create a nonprofit with a for-profit revenue arm, and really all the principles of design, culture, strategy, operations apply whether you're starting a nonprofit or a for-profit.
Well, here's a pretty applicable one. I think it relates to the Arts and Ecology Center or the Permaculture Skills Center. Tim asks, he asks about any insight into Suburban Impact Center acting as a training center for city slickers to move into eco-village reality.
If I'm understanding the question, it's how do we build places, institutions, entities, organizations where people can come and kind of dip their toes and get their feet wet in sort of a next economy paradigm that can actually catalyze that shift in them to want to invest their time, money, resources in building this next economy? What's the role of like intentional? Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that is really deeply, that's a heart pull for me because I've invested so much I have a background in urban planning and cities. And so much of my learning about permaculture was actually learning about it through the lens of commons and public spaces and how we can create more spaces where people can come and learn about permaculture and be immersed in really a sense of community. And I'll just say to that end, Diana Leaf Christensen is an amazing researcher, and she's researched what it takes. She researches 2,000 intentional communities across the world and wrote a book on it. I forget the name of the book, but it's a great book, Diana Leaf Christensen. And she identified a couple of key ingredients that all these intentional communities had across the board. The ones that were most successful, these were what they had. The first was an explicitly defined vision that was shared and agreed upon explicitly and written down. That's a critical success factor in her research around intentional communities, and that's, I think, part of why Lyft believes so deeply in having that for your entity as well. The other one was clearly defined roles and expectations, so that people really know kind of the ground rules of like what they're responsible for and what they can expect of other people. And the third, and possibly the most important, is regular and periodic training in collective decision making. How do we actually make decisions as a group that are empowering, that allow for all voices to be heard, that are nonviolent, and actually getting training in that? It seems, it's funny because so many businesses don't like to spend money on, visioning or training in group settings. It's like the last thing on their bucket list of things to spend money on. But actually giving people the skills and time to do the personal development to become a better facilitator of meetings, a more efficient decision maker in group process is critical. And having a written down vision in some ways actually addresses that because it allows you to be a lot more efficient in your meetings. If you all agree to the vision, you don't have to spend burdensome time in meetings dealing with every minutia of the detail of how that vision gets manifest. You can have implicit trust that everyone's going towards that vision, but regular training in collective decision making. And I can share, apart from Lift Economy, which we do this type of training, there's a host of really great programs. Holacracy is a great one, to actually build your skill set as a team of how you can operate a next economy epicenter in a way that's holistic and integral. Hope that answered the question.
Boy.
Yeah.
So much good stuff in that presentation. That is a mind sponge. That was amazing. I mean, there's so many X factors. Like the forecasting was something I know I have not done effectively enough, and it's so important. Oh, thank you for everything you shared, Erin. This has been absolutely fantastic. Give me some ones, everybody, if you thought it was a pretty awesome presentation. I know I got a lot out of it, and if when it came to professional consulting, I would absolutely ask Erin about how to improve business practices. So
And we just
across
might
the
do
board.
that anyway.
Yeah.
we have our own business we're trying to figure out.
Maybe I'll just, what was that, Neil?
I said Raleigh and I have our own business to figure out.
I would love to support the other thing. I think maybe the last thing I'll leave you all on is, I think I mentioned it right at the beginning, around my efforts and kind of personal strategy to reduce my need for financial income by foraging for my food, growing my food, innovative ways to share housing situations, and I think the other thing I would just say is that Lift Economy, we work in what could be considered the gift economy or a values-based economy, and we actually have a pretty innovative way that we work and engage with entrepreneurs. For example, we have an online course that's starting in July, actually, at end of June, and we actually work. It'll be a live online course where we'll take a small group, probably 10 to 12 entrepreneurs, and we'll take them through each of these steps, and we'll actually work with you to help you design your business, design your enterprise. And we actually have a values-based reciprocity system where if you feel like you received outsized returns, you feel like you got a lot of value, you can actually increase your payment, your financial compensation back to Lift Economy. Or if you feel that you did not receive the value, you can pay a little bit less. We ask you to pay according to the value you received. I do that with all of my clients because I deeply believe that we need more instances in our culture where we're actually individually deciding what things should be priced at and what things are valuable to keep in our economy. Because right now we're at the mercy of the market, and the market is inherently flawed. And so all the opportunities that we can cultivate in our ecosystems and in our economies to actually have explicit reciprocity and reclaim our ownership for telling people, hey, you produced a lot of value in my life by giving me that service or giving me that good, or certainly with our farmers, we need to be valuing the food that they grow much more highly than we do. So that's why we use values-based invoicing, and it also allows us to work with people who they themselves are trying to reduce their need for financial income and reciprocity, because we do believe that there is a piece of this economy, even though we work in big capital systems and we raise a lot of money and we're deploying a lot of capital to enterprises. In the grand scheme of things, the amount of capital we're deploying is micro compared to all the capital that's being invested out there in the capital markets. But we do believe that barter and gift and trade are a critical piece of the transition and the just transition.
Hey, Erin, if someone wants to get a hold of you who's watched this webinar, how do they do that?
Oh, thank you. Duh. Okay, I have here's my last piece. My email is erin@lifteconomy.com. We also have a podcast. It's called Next Economy Now, and I just interviewed Bren recently on the podcast. You can find it on any of your iTunes and SoundCloud. It's called Next Economy Now. And then we have this online course that you can go to our website at lifteconomy.com. That's LIFT economy.com. And you can actually speak with any of my business partners by going to our website. All of our emails are on our website, as well as this. If you go to lifteconomy.com/training, you can learn more about our upcoming online course. And I am so grateful to be a part of this masterclass. I'm so humbled by you all and what you're creating out there in the world. The fermentation company in New Jersey, I would just love to stay in collaboration with all of you, the woman who's training young women to be agriculture practitioners. Please keep in touch. We need collaboration. We need relationship to move this economy forward. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, so I'd love to stay in touch and collaboration with you all.
Awesome. Easy way to do that, immediately get in touch. In the chat box, I posted the link to the Facebook group for Sustainable Masterclass discussions, and it'll be there. I'll post the replay there, and along with an email, but you'll be able to ask some questions there. We'll post the Excel spreadsheet and things like that, so people who just immediately want to discuss this can, and they can quickly interact and collaborate with folks who are interested.
Yeah, I'd be glad to answer questions on the Facebook page.
Awesome.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you much, Erin, for coming on. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and hear your thoughts. Thanks, everybody out there who's come to Sustainable Design Masterclass. We love getting your emails and hearing from you. So keep in touch. Next week, we have Tim Richards, who started his own nut butter company.
He's a client of Lift Economies.
Yeah, he worked with you.
Yeah, he is a client, and he's actually going to be a part of the online training as well that's coming up.
There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I am cutting the recording now.